like I'm trying to identify what is so great about AI that outweighs all of this shit on the other side of the scale. Welcome to the Represent More podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Clarkson.
And I'm your co-host, Shireen Clarkson.
All right, Shireen, episode 10.
Episode 10.
Let's go, double digits. This is big.
Yeah. How are you? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good about it. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun, and it's been a kind of a cool experience, and I feel like we're starting to catch a groove a little bit. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, we're figuring it all out together.
Together we are. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into it. How was your weekend?
Weekend was good. We had another Santa Barbara weekend.
We did.
And that's always nice. Our happy place. We talked about this recently.
Coolio. So yeah, Santa Barbara. And then what else? I mean, Adia finished up her second week of beach camp.
That's right.
And we're planning 4th of July this weekend. We're going to go to Michigan.
Mm-hmm. We had a 4th of July celebration here at the office last week.
We did. We had a little barbecue. That was nice.
Yeah, it was good. Had some people come out. You did a song. I saw the video. I missed that in person, but
well, our HR
involved?
director, Robin Owens, is awesome, and she goes all out when she plans these things.
Yeah,
So this was her, I think, pet project, and yeah, we had a competition to see who could sing the national anthem the best.
Oh, okay. It was a competition. Okay, I only saw your video. And
well, others also sang.
Oh, I need to see the other videos.
Our producer, Alex Ulrich, also sang in the style of Johnny Cash, which was fantastic.
I need to see that. I'm going to find that and see it.
He said that the key is to start very low, because that way you can hit those high notes later in the song. That's
the key to that. Yeah, to doing that song for sure.
Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah. Johnny Cash, did he go that high in his...
He's like a baritone bass.
Yeah.
No.
I bet Alex did a great job. Can't wait
to
see that.
But who was really fantastic was Kristen Chapman brought her kids and her daughter, Adaya.
Oh.
She sang and was fantastic.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. Okay. That's so cute. I need to see that.
Yeah, she was awesome. And then her son won the
little game we played.
Yeah, one of the games.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're cute kids. Mm-hmm. So 4th of July, we're going to Michigan. That's exciting. You know, our annual dose of Americana. Mm-hmm. True Americana.
I believe that Michigan is the best place to celebrate 4th of July. I've decided that. I've concluded that, and I declare that.
I agree.
That is the place on the lake with the boats and the, what's that little activity?
Kneeboarding, tubing.
Tubing.
You like the tubing?
The tube. I mean, I'm not much of a tuber anymore, but the kids, tubing is so awesome. And then the fireworks and the whole thing. And it's just so Americana. And it feels good. It's fun.
Fireworks are a lot of fun.
Yeah, of course.
It's an experience. Mm-hmm. And then we get to see all my nieces and nephews and my siblings as well, which is great.
Yeah.
It's our chance to, every year, my brother hosts in Michigan on his lake house, and we just have the most fun.
Yep. Yeah. Looking forward to that.
And then we got to plan our summer vacation in Europe, which we're going to do at the end of July, early August. And what's on the short list right now?
We're talking about Croatia.
Yes.
We're talking about Albania.
It's big time.
Which
my
is
side
your
of the
heritage.
That's right. My mother's Albanian, and she's never been to Albania, nor have I. And that would be a full circle moment. You know, Albania throughout the 1900s was, I think, the most isolated country in the world, even more than North Korea, if you can believe. It was like during the Enver Hoxha years, and then in the late 90s, it started to open up into the aughts.
Yeah, that's nice. That's good. Yeah. I was thinking about Albania and our potential trip there, and not only is it exciting for me to go visit a new country and a part of the world that I've never been to, that part of Eastern Europe that I've never been to, but also I was thinking about Adia, and I want to go see, she's a big part of her, from your side is Albanian.
Right.
I'm like, I want to go see where my child is, where her ancestors are from. And I want to feel that part of her,
Yeah. Your child and your husband.
And my husband. Yeah. But the child. I mean, the husband.
But really, it's about the kid.
The husband
it is.
Part,
no, it's true.
The part about you is like interesting and like, interesting. The part about her is like, I want to know what she's made of. You know what I mean? And so,
definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Albania's going through a little thing right now, right? The people have taken to the streets to protest Jared Kushner and the company he's affiliated with, who are trying to build a luxury resort in a wildlife protected area.
Oh, okay.
And the people of Albania are not happy about it.
Mm-hmm. Good for them.
Yeah. So we'll see. But I think it'll be a nice reception. And I hear the beauty of the country is just something, really something.
Yeah. The coastline is supposed to be really beautiful, and same with Croatia. So we just got to lock it in.
I'm looking forward to it. Okay.
Talking about it, we got to lock it in.
Okay. We speak it into existence and then we make it happen.
Right.
So last week I was on CBS LA morning show again.
You were.
Talking AI.
Becoming a regular AI guy on CBS.
I really like their morning show.
Yeah,
they're fantastic.
Yep. Sheba and
Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like them.
The anchors in the morning there, and they're just total pros. And the producer, Phil Berman, really puts on a great show. Informative, hits all the current topics, and likes to talk about what's happening within the legal landscape, which I appreciate.
Yeah, I like that too. And I like that they've had an interest and a focus on AI from a legal perspective. And you've had the opportunity to do that a few times. So what was this one last week about? You want to talk about it?
Yeah, let's get into it. So this had to do with the use of artificial intelligence tools in the academic setting, both by professors on the one hand and also by students. But I think the reason that this is current and relevant and of interest is because many universities and colleges are trying to understand how to set policy when it comes to the use of AI in their academic environments. And we're seeing a lot of false accusations of cheating against students by universities and colleges and professors.
Yeah.
And the reason this is happening is because, as you know, ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and all of these AI tools have become so ubiquitous and so easily accessible that students are using them to, do their work, do their homework. And, I don't think there's any intent to cheat by the vast majority of students. Mm-hmm. But the rules are quite murky about what is allowable and what's not.
Yeah. So it's not that there's a ban on AI use in most schools, right? It's that they can use it in some manner. They can use it for some purposes, but they're using it in a way that maybe can be considered plagiarism or just outright copying.
Yeah.
And not in a way that the school allows. And so that's where the issues are arising, but it's not clear.
Yeah.
Right?
The universities and colleges are all across the board.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got, most of them are imploring their students to learn how to use AI tools or risk being left behind in the workforce, right? Because this technology is here, we can't ignore it, and we're trying to train the next generation workforce, right? So understanding how to use this technology is going to be paramount. And so they're imploring their students to do that.
Right.
But then when they do it, there's concerns about whether they're cheating. Well, then what they need to do is make clear rules so students know what's permissible and what's not. And that's where I think the problem is. You've got universities that have concerns, rightfully so, about academic integrity. but yet they don't have clear student codes of conduct or student handbooks that, or maybe even on a course by course, level, are not having conversations about what's permissible and what's not. And I think that's what's driving a lot of the concern. But listen, a student gets falsely accused, as we've seen at a number of universities, and they're lawyering up, and they should, because the stakes are high. If you think about it, you can have a student that is branded with a scarlet letter that could follow them their entire academic career and beyond. It could impact their ability to obtain a job after graduation. Mm-hmm. And so the stakes are extremely high. It can lead to expulsion. It can lead to suspension. It can affect financial aid, the ability to retain scholarships. I mean, the stakes are super high here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if a student is affected in any one of those ways, and I'm sure there's more consequences that you haven't listed out, but if they're experiencing those kinds of consequences, they should assert themselves and clear their name. And there's ways to do that, right?
Totally. I mean, so in the public setting, students are protected by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. So that guarantees them notice and hearing. Notice of any allegations against them, i.e., if they're being accused of cheating, mm-hmm. they are entitled to see the evidence against them. And then hearing is the second thing they're entitled to under that constitutional provision.
Yeah.
And that means they're entitled to at least an informal hearing of some kind. And then they're also entitled to protections in the private university context. But that's largely driven by contract law and is governed by, the student code of conduct and the student handbook. The problem is a lot of these universities haven't updated their materials since these AI technologies have been rolled out. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of ambiguity there that needs to be cleared up. So I would implore universities and colleges out there to make sure that they're updating their policies and procedures so students understand exactly what they can and can't be doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like the tides have changed, and sort of just recently, I feel like we were just talking about the teachers and the educators and their frustration with how to figure out who's using AI and that was the perspective and the concern. And now the concern is, okay, maybe they're overcorrecting or they're overly suspicious and accusatory and I think the solution is it all goes back to, let's just make sure everyone knows what the rules are.
Right.
And what are the policies? And then we won't have issues on either side. Well, hopefully fewer issues on both sides.
Well, to your point, a lot of the accusing professors are coming forward with nothing more than a computer printout of some AI detection tool that itself is run on AI.
Right. Right.
Which is insane, right? Because we know that all of these tools are inaccurate. They're based on incomplete data sets. They don't have the nuance of, a human being, someone, that can actually reason through whether someone is cheating or is likely to have cheated.
Right.
Right. So they need some corroborating evidence. It's just like our healthcare cases, right? We don't want United Healthcare and Humana and Cigna to be making life and death decisions about people's healthcare based on an AI tool alone that we know is prone to mistake. There has to be a human kept in the loop to make sure that, and not just one that's rubber stamping the AI-based decisions, but one that's actually double checking to make sure they get it right.
Yeah.
And the AI tools, in the university context are no different.
Right.
Nor are they any different when it comes to lending decisions or banking or access to mortgages or who gets hired and who gets fired. And all of these industries are using AI to make the decisions.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of problems out there.
It makes me wonder whether in the university and school context, whether outright bans, at least for a period of time, maybe certain schools, up to a certain grade, or maybe just all throughout schools, because this issue of everyone's using an AI against each other, and then everything's confusing, and there's so much room for error, and no one's using their brains enough, right? And so maybe in the schools, and as we're getting educated, we should still force our students to go old school and, and use your brain, use your, like, entirely, right? And not rely on this tool that, yes, is going to be important in life. And AI isn't going anywhere, and it'll probably get better. And we'll use it, but have that fundamental basic learning. And it sort of reminds me of, this is a super basic example, but like a calculator. We force students to learn math without a calculator, even though we know everyone's going to use a calculator, when they can, but just to know how to do it, right? Just to understand and go through the process. Maybe we need to do something like that with AI in the schools. Maybe it just shouldn't be really allowed.
Berkeley Law School is doing that very thing. They just implemented a policy, a no tolerance AI use policy, from what I understand.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes.
At least for now, right? Until we think there's a better way to utilize it. And we're still early.
I get very concerned about the way in which use of AI has been associated with atrophy of skills.
Correct.
Right?
That's exactly what I worry about for students, but also for all of us.
Totally.
Who are using AI.
There was a study I read recently where, I guess, using it in the medical context to diagnose, disease. AI tools were being used by doctors. The doctors performed better with the AI tools, but when they took the AI tools away, the doctors performed worse than they did before they used AI.
Makes sense. Not surprised at all. And that's concerning.
That is a big concern for society, I think.
For society, yeah, absolutely. You become reliant on, you see my math skills have deteriorated tremendously. And that's because I rely 100% entirely on a calculator. And now that I have a calculator on my phone, I'm not doing math in my head, unless I'm absolutely forced.
And this is a calculator supercharged. This is a very different thing.
Correct.
So, I think it's fine for you to use and become dependent upon calculators.
That's just
fine.
One part of my...
You're not outsourcing thinking when you're using a calculator. It's really intended to supplement you. But AI is intended to take over the thinking part of work, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was a lot of fun. I like doing the media appearances, and I liked that crew, and it was a fun conversation we had. There's so much to talk about when it comes to AI. It's just entangling itself into every aspect of our society, more so than and it's accelerating, right?
Yeah, I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. It's gonna be speeding up, I'm sure, if anything. So
what are you using AI for? Are you using it for anything?
I use it for brainstorming, and you knew that because I tell you that all the time. But I use it for brainstorming, and I don't want to say that it's not a replacement for thinking, but it gets me to think. I try to use it to get me to think more about a certain topic or a certain issue or something I'm trying to figure out. And it is helpful in that way because it does raise thoughts and ideas and questions that I wasn't really thinking about on my own. And as long as I go and figure out the answers to those questions in a verifiable way, I feel good about that brainstorming session. Where I have seen Where I get concerned with AI and in my use of it is when I rely on it for factual information too heavily without verifying. That's when, without fail, I realize that it's often wrong. There's what
you're
AI
saying
does?
You're doing some factual research and you go to the sources to verify and it turns out not to be correct.
Not 100% of the time, of course. Right. Sometimes it is correct, but
yeah, it happens to me all the time, of course.
What I find,
because it's still prone to hallucination and inaccuracy, and it may not be pulling the latest and greatest information. I mean, there's all kinds of problems with it. You know
where I find that it is often erroneous? It does a lot of paraphrasing. In fact, it's almost constantly paraphrasing. And the paraphrasing, when I go back and check, is not accurate, in my opinion. It's the paragraph or the little summary that it gives me. If I look at all the sources that's coming from, it is most often not accurate. The paraphrasing kills me. So yeah, that's something to look out for.
So just pausing there for a second, that is particularly problematic in our profession if the tool is being utilized in order to pull holdings from cases.
Correct.
And to make statements of the law.
Correct.
Because if it's inaccurately paraphrasing the law within cases, then that's a big, big problem for our work. We cannot have any mistakes, let alone have it regularly, misstate the law.
Right. There's so much nuance in the law, which is where the expertise of lawyers really comes in handy, and really comes through. Anyone can read a summary of something and sort of understand it generally, but the nuance of the law and how you apply it is where is the tricky part. And that's where I think AI often gets it wrong.
What I'm really concerned about is how fast this is being deployed in the medical context. Because I don't know if you've had this experience yet, but I was at a doctor's appointment recently and they're using the AI note takers in order to take notes. So the doctor doesn't have to take notes, with a pen and a piece of paper like they used to. But
the paraphrasing,
of course. I mean, maybe there's a transcript, but at the end of the day, they're paraphrasing.
And
so the next time you go to the doctor, instead of the doctor reviewing your chart with what they specifically wrote down, they're going to be reviewing bullet points paraphrased from a prior meeting. And the treatment is only going to be as good as the notes that this artificial intelligence tool paraphrased.
Right.
Isn't that a concern?
Yes, that's a concern. So you're saying doctors are using it for that purpose?
It's
right now.
Of course, it's probably the biggest use case for doctors is the AI note takers.
I just went to my doctor recently and she was typing away as I spoke. We had a 2-hour meeting. It was quite a doctor's visit. And
well, that's good.
So I'm really pleased about that after I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, I think that's concerning. I mean, we use it for note-taking purposes sometimes. And we're very sort of having to be very conscious to make sure that it's accurate. Internal meetings, right? That we have.
Exactly. That's a different scenario.
We've been sort of monitoring and seeing.
Not in a client meeting.
No, but
that's what the doctor context is.
Right.
It's basically it is a client meeting.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then to the extent that your doctor did her own typing, I mean, does she then input that into some AI tool and use an AI tool in some other way? Right. I mean, there are AI tools being deployed at all at so many points along the pipeline, right, of care or whatever,
right,
that it's like AI compounding on itself. And I would think that if you have errors upon errors upon errors, or imperceptible even inaccuracies compounded upon imperceptible inaccuracies over and over and over again, over time, that becomes quite a bit of a problem.
Right. Yeah. Look, one of my biggest hopes and dreams for AI is that there will be medical advancements. That's a little bit different. That's in the scientific part of medicine. I think that's most people's hope, right? That will be one of the best uses of AI. But, all this talk, I just worry that of all the errors, that's the piece that's concerning.
So can we pause here for a second and just let's meditate on this, because I've been thinking a lot about this.
About AI, have you?
Well, never. No, I've been thinking a lot about how I did an op-ed about 3 years ago when I think it was in June of 2023. It was after we had filed our groundbreaking lawsuits against Google and OpenAI. And we sounded the alarm about a lot of near, mid, and long-term concerns, risks associated with AI deployment. And so much of what we sounded the alarm on has borne out. And, whether it is, misinformation, exacerbated across social media channels and the media ecosystem, job displacement with so many jobs being displaced, or at least cited as the reason for cuts in the workforce by so many corporations, the use and misuse of AI, whether it is the deep fake or child pornographic materials being shared, whether it is medical advice being given by AIs that's inaccurate and relied upon by people to their detriment, and in some cases to their demise, AI suicide coaches. I mean, all of this was predicted and it's happening. And so I look at all of those on the negative side of the scale. And then I look over to the positive side of the scale, and I'm trying to identify what is so great about AI that outweighs all of this shit on the other side of the scale. And I guess my question to you is, what would you put on the positive side of the scale at this point? I know there's a lot of big promises being made by these companies whose valuations are driving multi-trillion-dollar gains in market in the value of big tech stocks. Okay, and the valuations are just crazy high, right? So much investment and so much money being flooded in the system. So I see the profit motive behind AI being some positive to society. But what are you putting on that side of the scale?
Yeah.
Brainstorming?
And that's my personal find. But I think AI is it sounds like it's helping with companies' efficiencies in certain ways. And I'm not exactly, as I'm sitting here trying to think about your question, I don't know what those ways are. Maybe with marketing. And I think there's some marketing advancements going on with companies in the consumer world. Yeah.
Are there?
I imagine
I see a lot of AI slop in the ecosystem, and that's just garbage to me. But that's a negative. I don't know. What's actually positive? Not what you think, but as you sit here today, can you think of anything tangible that's positive that's come from AI in the last 3 years?
Outside of the corporate or company perspective? Because
Anything.
I think there
Just
are
give me anything.
Well, you talked about job job replacements. I think that's
positive.
That's positive for the companies, for the corporations. I believe. I assume it's not a great thing for the workers and the employees, but I imagine it's good for some companies who are cutting costs and using AI for different purposes and not having to have.
But let's not go there. Because in my opinion,
I'm trying to answer the question.
No, I know. But let me just reframe it this way. That to me is cited as a reason for letting people go. But I want something tangible. Give me something that a company's actually pointed to as a reason for letting people go. I know it's cited as just like a general reason for letting people go.
If you're going to
let me get it out first. I understand that companies are citing AI and the efficiencies from AI as a basis for letting go of workers and reducing their workforce. That makes them more profitable because they don't have to pay workers as much. I don't see any proof of it. I have seen no evidence of it other than the fact of jobs being let go, being reduced, and being ridden. What's the actual evidence of any efficiency from any benefit from AI, like tangible? That's what I'm trying to understand. And I know that you're not an authority on this, but I'm just trying to think out loud. I can't think of any.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer, but do you think that companies are terminating workers and they're saying that they're using AI in place of workers and that they've got this great efficiency, but they don't? Is that your
we talked about this on a few episodes ago. We talked about how there have been some studies done that actually try to pressure test what corporate America is saying, i.e. that because of the efficiencies gained from artificial intelligence tools, they don't have a need for a certain percentage of their workforce. Now, the studies show that corporations are doing what they've referred to as AI washing. In other words, they are pointing to AI as the reason for eliminating jobs, but it's actually job elimination is coming from other things. Maybe the corporation is not as profitable. Maybe it has been a victim of mismanagement, but there's nothing that they can actually point to as a reason to replace workers.
Okay.
It's just a pretext for getting rid of workers.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm trying to understand. I don't know. Maybe AI combined with robotics is allowing, manufacturing companies to get rid of factory workers, but I don't have any actual evidence of it, and I haven't seen anything, that suggests that that's actually what's happening.
Right.
But forget about the corporate context. I mean, all of these things we were promised. Where are the medical advancements, Shireen? It's been 3 years. Where are the medical advancements coming from AI?
Insurance claims are being figured out quite quickly. Maybe that's one.
You're being sarcastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know that. We know that, they are more efficiently denying people's health care.
Right. I don't know. This is a great question. It's a great topic, actually. And I wonder if it's almost like we need an audience of people to pool from and to sort of get other perspectives. I wonder what benefits and what advancements are happening that we maybe, aren't reading about or aren't hearing about.
Isn't it odd, though, that as we sit here, we can't think of a single thing that is beneficial to society?
Yes. And I'm just wondering if we're, are we living in a bubble or are we biased? I don't know. Or is it really just not out there?
It's a good question. I mean, maybe we're so, I don't know. I'd like to think that I'm pretty well read on what's happening in the AI sphere. And I know a lot of negative things that are happening. But I can't think of too many positive things. In fact, I can't think of a single one as we sit here.
Yeah. Well,
all right. Well,
we're at a loss on that one.
I think it's time for an op-ed update.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna write an update to my
I like that
op-ed from 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And just do a state of the world
Mm-hmm.
and a state of AI right now and where we are in the AI story. Because, you know, part of the objective of writing that was to try to convince legislators and policymakers to implement guardrails, and also industry to deploy the technology in a thoughtful, responsible way, because it just felt like they were barreling ahead towards a cliff. And I don't know how close we are to the cliff right now, but we're still barreling ahead without any guardrails. And so, you know, maybe it's time for an update.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been 3 years.
I know, it's gone by fast, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's time. I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Well, what else is going on? We wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening with the Supreme Court. Some significant decisions have come down, but there was one in particular that I think you wanted to talk about. Yeah,
I wanted to talk about the Monsanto decision that we've been waiting for, which was highly disappointing, upsetting.
Oh, so we're not going in a positive direction now?
No, this is like a really,
this is a downer of a podcast for 10.
Seriously.
All right, what can we do? You know what? Let's just to button up that last one.
Give us some more.
This is what we're going to do. We are going to not just lament the last 3 years of negativity, but we are going to use it as an opportunity to propose or re-strategize fixes, right?
Okay.
Some things that we can do as a society to try to bring out the best in AI, right?
Bringing out the best in AI.
Yeah, we'll bring out the best. You know, we will build off of our togetheron.ai campaign, and we'll post the op-ed to that, and hopefully we'll come up with some positive, constructive takeaways for what we can do in the coming months and years. How about that?
I like it.
Okay, perfect.
That's good.
All right, so now we're going to go into this Supreme Court decision.
Okay, now we're going to talk about this disappointing opinion, and then we'll find a way to uplift at the end.
I like that. I like that. Let's put a little positivity in here, right?
Yeah, we'll do it at the end.
Okay. So we're going to go negative to start.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us what...
We got to think about our topics more carefully. We got to have one super positive, exciting, happy topic next time.
Well, you know what? I mean, listen, this is a serious decision that came down, and it's not roses and puppy dogs and ice cream. It's actually quite sobering.
Yeah.
All right. So what happened? What was the decision? What was the case about? And what did the Supreme Court rule?
So last week on June 25th, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the Monsanto versus Durnell case that's been highly awaited. The reason it's been highly awaited is because this decision is going to impact all the cases against Bayer regarding this Monsanto's Roundup, which has allegedly caused cancer in hundreds of thousands of victims.
So a little background. So Bayer purchased Monsanto, and Monsanto is the company behind the chemical glyphosate, which is commonly known to members of the community as Roundup. People use this as a weed killer, but it's also it's manufactured en masse, right, at scale for industrial purposes. And big food companies use mass-produced Roundup in order to help crops grow without weeds, right?
Right. It's a weed killer.
Okay. And so the glyphosate has been linked by a number of medical professionals and scientists to cancer. It is a carcinogen or suspected carcinogen, and some doctors believe it is a proven carcinogen. Is that right?
Yeah.
And that has spawned thousands of lawsuits across the country for a failure to warn of the cancer risks. Okay, so that's the background.
Okay.
So then one of these cases, I guess, ended up being appealed. There was some big jury verdict. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was going to work backwards, but we can work forwards from where you're going with this. So yes, the EPA at one point in 2016, 2017, the EPA looked at glyphosate again to determine whether it might be causing cancer, because the research was showing that it was associated with cancer. And the EPA decided that it wasn't going to change the labeling requirements at that time because it didn't think that the association was strong enough, essentially, is what the EPA concluded. And so there has been no requirement that Roundup be have any labeling or any warning label on its on Roundup by many organizations, but not by the EPA, which is what is the issue here. And so there have been many lawsuits around the country which have found that there was a failure to warn. And so these plaintiffs that have been filing tort claims against Bayer and Monsanto have received great verdicts in their favor. Some of them have been paid and the cases have been closed, but many hundreds of thousands are still pending. And so this one case that was taken up to the Supreme Court is Durnell. And this was a case out of Missouri, who the plaintiff claimed that he had using Roundup for 2 decades caused his non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And he was an agricultural worker. Correct. And he won at the trial court level. I think it was $1 million verdict, and it went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And this is the case we're talking about. And the court decided 7-2 verdict that federal law preempts state law in this case, and specifically FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, preempts any failure to warn or personal injury claim that's a state law claim. And specifically what they said is that because FIFRA doesn't require any sort of cancer warning, state law can't require it or impose liability on Bayer for not having had the label warning. And so this is highly disappointing and hugely impactful, not only for this one case, Durnell, but it's going to impact all the other cases that are pending. Yeah, there are thousands of these lawsuits across the country, right? Yeah. And so you've got thousands of people that have been using Roundup for some period of time and have developed some form of cancer that a medical professional has linked to their use of Roundup. And so many medical professionals, yeah. Many medical professionals. And so the Supreme Court's ruling, where does it leave all of these people with that are suffering from cancer caused by Monsanto and Bayer's Roundup? Where does it leave them? It doesn't leave them with much of an alternative or much recourse in their cases. Their cases are not going to survive. Because all of their cases arise under state law, which the Supreme Court has now ruled is preempted by this Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. Right. Wow. I mean, it's when you say it out loud, it's pretty gnarly. And so the 7-2, I was actually surprised by the 7-2 because you've got a super majority conservative Supreme Court. And then you've got 3 liberal justices. You've got Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor, and Ketanji Brown Jackson as the kind of liberal minority. But this case
this decision didn't split along conservative and liberal lines, did it?
No, the only two that dissented were Ketanji Brown Jackson and Neil Gorsuch.
Right. So, and Neil Gorsuch is on the conservative side, typically. And then Elena Kagan and Sotomayor were in the majority.
Right. Didn't
ruling
join
against the plaintiffs.
That's right.
Did that surprise you?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was, you would think at least it was going to be maybe a 3-6, right?
Yeah. Math calculator, if you had one,
Yeah. Highly disappointing. And of course, I agree with the dissent. The dissent, essentially the other side of the coin.
Yeah, what is the other side?
The way they could have ruled is essentially FIFRA is quiet about this warning. It doesn't say that it should not be labeled this way. It's just quiet about a cancer warning. And so, and FIFRA as federal law requires that there be no mislabeling. So there is that. And state law, the state laws that these cases are brought under, are alleging that there's a mislabeling, and not that, which is consistent with federal law. And because FIFRA is quiet about this,
silent
about this cancer warning, it doesn't go against FIFRA to require it, essentially. And so the dissent is saying the court should have looked at this as a mislabeling and something that's actually consistent with federal law, not it's not contrary to FIFRA. So,
this is super disappointing. I just think about the thousands of families that have been affected by this product, that they had no knowledge of the cancer risk because it wasn't warned of, and now the Supreme Court's saying there was no duty to warn. I guess I don't know if they're saying there's no duty to warn, but they're basically saying that the label as approved by the EPA was good enough.
Yeah, they're saying requiring a warning would be contrary to FIFRA because FIFRA says that the label is good. As is.
To me, that's just you got to really twist yourself into a pretzel to come to that rationale. Okay.
It leaves all these people without a remedy for these horrible harms that they've suffered.
Yeah, it's just another example of a long line of examples about how the law does not provide a remedy for people who have been tangibly and seriously harmed in a measurable way. But the law just doesn't provide for it. I think a lot about other situations where this has happened in my career. You're aware of the microstatute in California. It is it's the statute that places caps on damages, non-economic damages in medical malpractice cases and medical negligence cases, and it also caps attorney's fees. And that was passed due in large part to the insurance lobbies and California insurance lobby's efforts back in the 70s. And only in recent years is MICRA starting to be adjusted in a way that helps people who have been victimized or whose family members have been victimized by medical negligence to hold the wrongdoers to account. But I remember, in my early career, when I was a solo practitioner, when I had a small law office in California, I'd have victims of medical negligence come to my office and ask me to represent them. And I couldn't take on the case because the statute was so punitive to victims' rights, victims of medical negligence, because it capped non-economic damages at $250,000, right? And the reason that's important is because if you're a victim of medical negligence and you don't have high economic damages, either because you're a high income earner, okay, or you're young and you've got a lot of earning years ahead of you, then the $250,000 cap on non-economic damages, that's pain and suffering associated with it, is really all you're going to get. And is it financially responsible or rational for a solo practitioner to put all their blood, sweat, and tears into a case where it's going to be valued at $250 soaking wet, but you got to hire experts, and it's going to take years of effort. The business decision it's not a viable case to take on to prosecute under those circumstances, and that's what micro was intended to do. So I remember having, in one situation, there was a woman who was in her 70s. She was retired, and she had a discectomy. And when she went in for spinal surgery, which spinal surgery, of course, is a serious surgery, but what she was getting in particular had become routine. And yet the doctor had clipped her optic nerve somehow and left her blind. Okay, so it felt like liability was clear, except she's of retirement age, she's not working, and non-economic damages are capped at $250,000. That's a tough case to take. I had another situation in which a truck driver who, didn't keep clean books, accounting records, including, how he made his income, was a victim of medical negligence, and I couldn't take the case. So I don't know. It's just so sad when you've got clear liability, someone's been wrong, who did it, but you're left without a viable path forward to hold the wrongdoer accountable. And this is what thousands of families across the country are now going to be faced with when it comes, after this 7-2 ruling by the Supreme Court against Mr. Durnell. It's sad.
It is. It was a very upsetting decision. I didn't think it was going to go that way.
That's not the only upsetting decision that's come down by the Supreme Court. We just had a few come down this morning, in fact, right?
Yeah.
Did you read about the decision that came down this morning for the Supreme Court, and it broke? Well, actually, I'll share one that I think was, let's keep it positive. Let's turn to a positive, right?
Okay.
So there's a positive decision that came down this morning for the Supreme Court, 5-4 decision, and it had to do with whether Mississippi's vote counting election law was constitutional or not. And what the election law allowed for is for votes to be counted up to 5 days after the date of the election. Okay? Mississippi passed it because they wanted military serving overseas and students away at college to have a little bit more time after Election Day to get their ballots in and counted. And so the law provided for, as long as the ballot was postmarked by Election Day, it could be accepted up to 5 days later and counted, and those votes would count. So the Republican National Committee and the Mississippi Republican Committee challenged that law. They said votes have to be counted on Election Day. The Constitution provides for Election Day happening on the second Tuesday or whatever of November. So votes have to be counted on that day. The Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, held that the election can take place, and the election is just casting the ballot, but says nothing of when that has to be counted, and provides for states to decide how long they're going to accept votes to be counted after the ballots have been cast.
Yeah.
So long as they're postmarked by election day, states have the ability to decide how much time they're going to give for the votes to be counted. And it was 5-4.
Great.
And so that's very encouraging.
Yeah, I'm surprised about that one as well, actually.
Yeah,
and happily surprised. Yeah.
And that was authored by Justice Coney Barrett and Justice Justice Roberts also sided with Kagan, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Sotomayor as a 5-4. So I thought that was encouraging.
It is.
But we see this happening. There's all kinds of things happening with election law right now.
Yeah.
All of these challenges, they're trying to set up the right case to get to the conservative Supreme Court to chisel away at, at people's rights when it comes to the ballot box. And that's particularly concerning as we move into the midterms here in November.
Yeah. The current administration wants fewer people to vote. That seems clear. They're finding ways to avoid people from voting.
And that's right. And so there's a lot of voter suppression efforts, I believe, to your point. But then there's also other tactics at work here, right? So the gerrymandering is on a different level. I mean, it seems that every state is now gerrymandering their voting districts in order to make it more advantageous to whoever it is that's in the majority in their particular state. So this all started with Texas a few months ago, where President Trump asked Governor Greg Abbott to redraw the Texas legislature to redraw the districts in Texas. And they did. And they think that they're going to net 5 more Republican congresspeople, 5 more Republican representatives after the gerrymandering. And then California, led by Governor Newsom, punched back and said, well, we're going to gerrymander as well, and we're going to redraw all of our districts. And so they did. And so it looks like that could net Democrats another 5, 6, 7, 8, I don't know how many, but, high single digits in California. But then Virginia and all of these other red states have since redrawn theirs as well. So, when you look at how many different districts are in play, it looks like it's going to be, 20 or 30 or 40 seats are going to be up for grabs. And when you look at the margin in Congress right now, it's so thin that could have a huge impact on the outcome of the midterms, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Serious concerns. President Trump knows the stakes are high, and his administration knows the stakes are high, because if things swing in the other direction, let's say the Democrats take back the House and the Senate, then what comes next? What's the first thing they're going to do?
Tell me.
I think they're going to pass impeachment articles, and that'll be a real problem for President Trump. So that's what's at stake, I believe. Not to mention, right now he's got carte blanche with a fully red legislature, and swinging it in the other direction could be a serious problem for him. And he can see the writing on the wall. I mean, his favorability rating is what? It's in the 20s, or it's like 30% after this Iran fiasco and the tariff fiasco and the ICE fiasco. I mean, I've never said fiasco 3 times in 10 seconds.
It's a lot of fiascos. Mm-hmm. We're going to get positive.
Well, I'm just waiting for you to stop me. I mean, I went on about a 10-minute rant there.
You really did. I'm going to stop you now.
What are we going to talk about? Where are we going to go?
No more politics, please, and no more...
Well, I wasn't anticipating getting political, but, we're talking about the Supreme Court, and it seems to be pretty partisan these days.
Not often is, but yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Even
it's
more
good.
so
It's good that they went 5-4, and some of the conservative justices joined the liberals to, prevent what seems like further deterioration of election law.
Yeah.
Right?
That is a positive ruling. Thanks for highlighting that one.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to. Happy to get positive. What else? What else is happening out there? God, I hope our rose, but we shouldn't do rose, bud, or thorn. We should just play rose.
So I think we're in a good spot.
I think we're in a good spot too. Should we do rose?
We can do rose.
Bud or thorn? Yeah, probably just rose.
Let's just
do you have anything rosy to end on a rosy note? Rosie was my great grandmother's name. She was so funny. Gaga. We called her Gaga.
You can share your rose, and then I had a thorn prepared, so I'm going to go with a...
All right, we'll get your thorn out, and then we'll go rose.
I'm joking. I didn't have a thorn prepared. This whole podcast has been a thorn.
Has it?
I mean, somewhat.
Okay, it has been thorny.
I will think of a rose, of which I have many. So let me think of one that I'd like to share. You can.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I will share. Okay, my rose is, I am proud of myself for committing to more activity throughout the day, more bodily activity throughout the day.
Really?
I know that you like
bodily activity.
Bodily activity.
I don't think you are.
Maybe I'm not using that correctly.
Using that phrase correctly. Do you mean physical activity?
Body activity. Physical activity.
Okay. Bodily activity is a different thing.
Right. No, that's
which
status
can
quo.
be physical.
That
but
is status quo, and everything's fine there.
Okay, good.
No.
Good.
Physical activity. I have committed to, and I tend to be physically active most days, but then I sit all day long and work. And I've decided I have to split it up. In other words, I will do some physical activity in the morning. I will work much of the day, and then I must take an afternoon walk or some other type of physical movement. And what I've been doing is taking the dogs for a very long walk in the afternoons.
That's good.
And I've been committing to do that, and I've done it. And I feel really good about that this last week. And
the dogs love it, I'm sure.
The dogs love it. And just going out into the day in the afternoon is nice when you don't ever do it.
Which dog likes the afternoon walk more, Rapunzel or Jasmine?
They both really enjoy it.
Okay.
They both really love it.
But Rapunzel really loves to, she needs to be exercised. She's a big dog.
Yep. But
Jasmine just chases animals around the yard, and she's content doing that, I think.
It's good for all three of us. So
we've got a Cavapoo named Jasmine and a golden doodle named Rapunzel. And Rapunzel is, for all intents and purposes, a human being.
100%.
Yeah. She's awesome.
She's a human. And Jasmine is a dog, but a very good dog.
Yes, she is.
Just a wonderful little creature.
She's cute. Okay, good rose.
Yeah, that's
happy to
rose.
hear that.
Thanks.
Oh, my rose. bud or thorn?
Stick to
I won't
rose.
go thorn. I'll try to go rose. Well, you know, it's the 250th birthday celebration of the country this week. So we're going to be spending 4th of July in Michigan, as we talked about at the top of the show. And I'm very excited to have some good family time, some lake life, and to celebrate our country. I think the 250th celebration that's happening in DC right now appears to be kind of they've laid a bit of an egg, as I understand it, with the reflecting pool fiasco and all of the other fiascos.
Mm-hmm.
But it is such a 250 is a big number,
mm-hmm.
and one that I'm actually looking forward to celebrating, among us, and hopefully sitting and meditating on what it means for our country, and in particular, the resilience of our country. 250 is fairly young for a republic, all things considered, but
like the rest of the world.
But 2.5 centuries is, I think we've been through a lot as a country, and I think that our republic has shown a lot of resilience, particularly in the past couple of years. And I believe that, we're going to come back stronger as a result of, the last couple of years. And it's been probably a bit of a wake-up call for how fragile a democracy is, how it needs to be cultivated and loved, and so I'm going to think a little bit about that. That's my rose.
Okay. Are you planning on running for office? That was very...
No, I have no plans to run for office. I'm not interested in that.
Patriotic. I like that. Very good.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, running for office, man, also not for the faint of heart. That's got to be tough, especially these days, with the way that every, candidate is just put under a microscope, and, because we're basically living in a society that is a surveillance society, and there's a dossier on every single person.
Yeah.
It can't be a fun experience, right?
I would never think to put myself in that position. I think you have to be really power hungry to want to do that.
It probably takes a certain kind of person.
Yeah.
Right?
I think so.
And I wouldn't, I'm going to push back a little bit. I don't know that it necessarily requires someone who is driven by power.
It certainly does not require that. And I wish that it didn't involve that. But, I blurted that out thinking about a few particular people in office, and many people in office. And I think that the majority of people in public office in America, and certainly the higher ups, tend to have that as a motivation. Obviously, there are plenty of people that are politicians and in roles, in government roles, that are there for the right reasons and trying to better our society. But I think that power and greed and control have a lot to do with some of those who take it very far.
All right, let's close on this one. Favorite politician.
We're so positive. We're just like negative all day. Favorite politician. Favorite politician. I mean, I'm a big Obama fan.
Okay, so you're a big Obama fan.
Throw him out there.
I like Obama too. In fact, I saw him at the golf course. I saw him at Sherwood Country Club a few months ago. Okay.
He's up there for me.
Yeah. I mean, kind of thinking about where we are right now and looking back, I was at the Grant Park election night celebration. in Chicago. That was amazing.
I bet it was. Who's one for you? Bernie
Sanders.
I love him.
That's my guy.
I love him.
I love Bernie Sanders.
So there's an example of somebody who, in my view, is not in it for the power, the greed, the control. He's
got a constitution and he's there to serve people. It's his whole track record for his entire career and his entire life.
You know who else I believe in that way? I believe AOC. I believe that she
can make a run in 28.
She might.
Yeah, that's what they're saying.
Right. I think she means what she says for the most part.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll probably get to know her a lot better in the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There's still a bit to get to know. So
yeah.
Let's see. It'll be very interesting to see how all this bears out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that's episode 10. It's in the books. How do you feel?
Good stuff.
Good stuff. Okay. All right. We decided to go dark on episode 10, but it's okay. I think we reoriented a little bit. I'm going to read us out.
Okay.
Represent More is a production of We Are Them Media, featuring me, Ryan Clarkson, and my co-host, Shireen Clarkson. Represent More is produced and edited by Marketing for Justice and Q Michelli and recorded live at our studio in Malibu, California. Alex Ulrich is our studio manager. Be sure to subscribe to Represent More wherever you get your podcasts and find us on Substack at representmore.substack.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.